Okay, hello, and I owe you all an apology. They tell you when you're public speaking you should never apologize for anything, but I'm here because I didn't make FINHTML5 because I'm stupid and I lost my wallet, and I didn't want to travel to Europe with no money. So anyways, I'm here now. Was anyone here at FINHTML5? Okay, yep, then I apologize to the right group. Super sorry about that. Let's jump into it. So, no surprise, I work on PhoneGap at Adobe Systems. Used to work at a company called Adobe, where we... So, in 2007, Steve Jobs announced the iPhone. And we screamed like little girls, jumped in our cars, and drove from Canada down to Seattle to buy iPhones because you can't buy an iPhone in Canada because no one's selling iPhones in Canada. And so we drive down to Seattle and we buy them. And we loved the idea. Steve Jobs said, you're going to build apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we're like, yes, that's exactly how it should work. That's awesome. And then a year later, he's like, psych, you're writing Objective-C. And we're like, no, dude, no. So we didn't really intend to set out on this big, weird journey of building something like PhoneGap. We really just wanted to build apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that's where it all started. So, you know, that part. But there's a bunch of other stuff that we do. So we started with iOS in 2008. And then shortly after we added Android, BlackBerry. Believe it or not, BlackBerry 4.2. We're up to 10 now. Windows Phone 7, Windows Phone 8, Qt, Bada, Tizen, a whole bunch of them. So most of the platforms. And the thing that sets PhoneGap apart, I think, from all the other guys that are doing something kind of similar to what we're doing is that we're all based on emerging standards or standards that already exist. And the big example here for me was the geolocation API. The only people who had done this were Google Gears. And we thought that was awesome. And the thing about PhoneGap that we wanted to do was we wanted the web to be a first-class platform. We wanted the web to compete with what the native platforms could do. The web browser couldn't access geo at this time. And so we implemented the geolocation spec that was nascent. No one had done it yet, but it was an emerging spec. And then a year later, it landed in WebKit, and it was in all the web browsers all of a sudden. And applications that targeted the first version of PhoneGap were portable to the web browser. And that's the point. And this is why we're attacking these emerging standards. We hope to be portable back to the web browser. So PhoneGap this is sometimes confusing. We're a distribution of an open source project called Apache Cordova. PhoneGap was always open source by design. And when we were acquired by Adobe, it became clear that the project was outgrowing its original roots, and it was time for it to move to the stewardship of a foundation like Apache. And they happily accepted under Cordova. Cordova is the street that Adobe software was on. It's also a street I lived in Vancouver. Apparently it's a place in Alaska and might have something to do with Spain. But yeah, so that's the deal there. Apache Cordova, you think of it like WebKit is to Chrome or to Safari or Linux is to Red Hat or something like that. And other people distribute Cordova too, actually, on that point. So IBM has one called Worklight. AppMobi, which is now owned by Intel, has one. Yeah. So PhoneGap's this huge group of developers, like a massive group of developers. We're getting downloaded now something like 250,000 times a month. So this mobile thing is not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. And there's a ton of people contributing, which I'll talk more about now, apparently. It's not just like a big open source community of individuals, although that's the primary driver. It's also a lot of large organizations contributing back to PhoneGap. Adobe obviously has a bunch of developers. BlackBerry and Alicia Keys are pitching in. Google's there. Microsoft, IBM, and Intel, and many others are contributing. So one thing that's different between, I think, our project and a lot of other projects is that we have a strong belief in release cadence as a priority over shipping features to a particular date. And this has built a lot of confidence in the project. We ship a point release every month, but we're indiscriminate about the features that land in a point release. So every month, no matter what, we ship a point release that includes all the bugs that we have fixed up to that point and all the new features that we've added up to that point. it's a big deal because we're playing cat and mouse with Apple and Google and all these other people that are shipping SDKs from which our abstractions lie. And this means that as a developer, if you're depending on our project and you need a fix, you know that it's going to land. It also means that we're not trying to target a marketing date and we're driving our developers to death on a march towards basically a meaningless abstraction. A release is just a version number, and a version number is really just for issue tracking, and we treat it as such. Now that said, at 3.0, we'll probably deprecate a bunch of stuff and we'll change how things work, but otherwise, cadence takes a priority over features. So this is the big question that people ask. There was like a comment on Read Write Web a while ago where someone was talking about how, you know, there's this PhoneGap thing and this guy's like, morons, the web is no good at cross-platform. He said that on a website from any device in the world at any time. Like, web's pretty good at cross-platform. Like, it's good at hitting different operating systems. It's good at hitting different screens. It's good at hitting different SDKs. But the web totally did not solve all the problems that we have today as software developers. And so when I look at what the native platforms can do, I'm compelled, and I want to build towards these things, right? Like, I want offline access. I want push notifications. I want the ability to do all those things, and the web doesn't do all those things. The problem is these proprietary platforms, they come with like a hitch, and that hitch these days is that you're going to be through a curated distribution model. You have to go through an app store, and you have to code against their SDKs. Sometimes you have to pay for the privilege of writing code to a device you already own, which is crazy, right? So our ultimate goal for PhoneGap is not to have to do this. Our ultimate goal is to go back to being web developers and shipping to the browser and to a common platform that we can all distribute to as a right. That's the idea. And the way that we get there is through standardization. And we're trying to demonstrate the web can be a first-class platform. The web has always lived inside of a sandbox, and this is a feature. It's not a bug. This is absolutely deliberate, and it's a good thing, and we need that for the web, but we also need the ability to ship to these platforms and offer these features that have privileged access to different APIs, which I'm going to talk a lot more about. So we've also seen this weird trend where we're not the only ones thinking this, and I don't think everybody's noticed this or recognized this today. But if you're paying attention, you'll have noticed that Google Chrome OS is starting to get a lot of attention. You can build apps with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Windows 8 RT or Windows RT or whatever they're calling it, you can write apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Firefox OS. The Mythical ties in, which will ship any day now, or at least every 6 months we hear it's going to ship any day now. You know, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. WebOS. Anyway, so that means that Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, Samsung, Intel, I guess HP and LG are all betting on the idea that you can ship apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for their next generation operating systems. And this isn't to be overlooked. It's a big deal. These guys are pretty big players. So anyways, using PhoneGap, we can start doing this today, and we can target all these mobile operating systems in particular, which are definitely places that you wouldn't necessarily think that you could do this, or you wouldn't normally be able to do this. Something else just to like throw out there. I was called out last time I talked about PhoneGap that this was a cheap shot, but it's not a cheap shot. This is like legit. All of those app stores are hybrid apps, which is interesting, right? So the actual delivery mechanism for installing applications uses a web browser. It's not a cheap shot. It's just trippy. That's all that is. So I have to apologize. I know that big logo in the top right corner there is telling you that I can ship applications to all these different platforms, and you're like, he works for Adobe. It has happened before, but I don't think it's happened like this. Adobe's been involved in this space for a long time. They've thought about these things before, and I think in the last year they've demonstrated that they really do believe in the web as a delivery mechanism. Apps for all these different platforms are incompatible by design. If you're shipping for iOS, you're not going to ship for Android, and that's just the way it works. And we want to fix that. Adobe recognizes that there's not a lot of money in runtimes. We've lost a whole bunch doing it, but it does recognize that there's a lot of money that can be made in tools, which we do want to fix. So what I'm talking about here are packaged web applications, not just packaged applications, to be really specific. And the reason that being a packaged web application is important is that this would be truly portable by its design. The web is portable. So the characteristics of packaged applications. This part's kind of boring. Packaged application includes things like an application manifest. So this is how we know what the app is. And we know its title, we know its icons, we know things like the path to where the starter HTML page is. But the app manifest also gives us the ability to mark up things like the features the app can enjoy so that we can do conditional compilation. And it lets us do things like declare what capabilities that application can have so that we can have a permissioning model against it. So we can say, hey, I need access to the file system, and this gives us the permissioning to do that. Packaged applications also have a runtime context, which can be different across platforms. The big one is the permissioning model for this piece right here, but it's also got a whole bunch of weird kind of attributes. So a regular web application is stateless. It doesn't have like any idea of where it is. Whereas a packaged application, it can run in the foreground, it can run in the background, it can have pause and resume events. There is the concept of a page visibility API now in HTML5, but otherwise there's not like this kind of runtime context or a life cycle or an execution life cycle. So in execution life cycle, we have things like application launches, application exits, application pauses, and it resumes. But then we also get other kinds of events. So when the best example, well, there's a couple. Okay, so there's online and offline. So knowing if I'm online or offline is useful because I might have to save data. And we might even want to take that a little bit further and know more about the network state. If I'm on a 3G connection, for example, I can load a faster video or a more higher resolution video. The other funny example is battery events. So if a battery is about to die, I'm going to want to be able to subscribe to that so I could save data in case I'm about to lose my application state. We actually tried to implement this in PhoneGap, and we found out that when we pull the battery for battery events, we drain the battery like a motherfucker. So don't use our battery API. So runtime security is actually the big deal. So the web doesn't have a runtime security model. Its model is that you're in a sandbox and you can't do shit. And we're trying to fix that part by example at the moment. We're hoping that we can give the ability to add declarative methods for you to say that you need extra privileges for your application and let the user decide. This isn't perfect yet. So in the case of so geolocation is a good example. When you load up a map, you get, hey, can I access your geolocation? Which is cool. But imagine if we did, hey, do you mind if I access your accelerometer? Sure. Hey, do you mind if I access your camera? Okay. Hey, do you mind if I access your compass? Fine. Right? Like this would just not scale. So what we're trying to do is have a model that will work and allow for runtime security beyond the sandbox and access these types of features without being super intrusive to the user. In the case of PhoneGap, we're falling back to the operating system. Today in Android, for example, when you load up, it's like, hey, can I have access to everything? And most users are like, sure. And that's not good enough for the web. We have to figure this one out. And we're working with people at W3C to find ways to figure that out. So all of these things are device APIs. And this is the PhoneGap API as it sort of stands today. Actually, just for some context for me, who here has built a PhoneGap app? Okay, so like roughly half of you guys. And has anyone checked this out before, or is this all brand new? Is this brand new? Okay. Cool. All right, so when we first started building PhoneGap, we totally explored the idea of doing cross-platform UI stuff, and then we realized that the web was a way better surface for this. When you start to do things like declarative APIs for, say, a tab bar, and you go to 1 or 2 platforms, it's not such a big deal. But when you start hitting 5 or 6 platforms, you end up with leaky abstractions. A tab bar on Android is pretty close to a tab bar on iOS, except for it totally isn't. And so then you end up with code where it's like, if iOS, else Android. We're like, oh God, this is a nightmare. Why don't we let developers, web developers, use their skills with HTML and CSS to theme up and build their own applications using what the web is good at. And we'll take the hard part, which is device APIs. So device APIs are cross-platform by their nature. Most devices have sensors and they have data. And those sensors can be things like accelerometer, or your GPS, your camera. And the data can be things like your file system, your contacts, your media. And so those things are on almost every phone. And that's the stuff that we wanted to give people access to. And those are the things that most compelling applications are built from. So those are the device APIs. All this stuff is cool, but it's super dangerous. So I love that GIF. I just wanted to use it. We're cheating today. So we get to bootstrap PhoneGap on top of what the operating systems that we're on do for security. We can't build our own runtime security model necessarily just yet. And for the open web, if we do this stuff, if we just allowed people to act, well, I'll give you a thought experiment. Imagine if any website you visited could turn on your front-facing camera and email your friends. No, no, no. So people ask, who's using PhoneGap? And I got a few examples. This is my personal favorite example. It's Untapped, which is Foursquare for beer. These guys are rad. So some friends of ours built this app for the web. And they built it just using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They shipped it, had a URL, and you could go there, and they use cache manifest and all that. And it was great. They're like, we should totally ship this with PhoneGap. And we're like, no, dude, why would you do that? And they're like, well, it'd be cool. And we're like, no, that's not a good reason. It's on the web. Just leave it on the web. It's perfect. And then they added camera functionality, and they used the web to do it. And they had like 20,000 downloads in the first week. And we're like, oh, I'm super sorry about that. We totally advised them to not get downloaded 20,000 times in the first week. Anyway, so they shipped to PhoneGap. Now they have a ton of users, and life is good. This is another location-based app from some friends of ours, Gather. Again, totally simple app. They shipped, this one was funny because they spent a ton of time getting it totally perfect on iOS, and then they put it into the App Store for review. And before it got through its App Store review, they had ported it and shipped it on Android. Just like typical. Yeah, it's simple API, or simple little sort of classic app design, but works. Wikipedia shipped an app using PhoneGap on, I think, most platforms now. I love this screenshot because it's like, we saved water. This was like a couponing app. As you can tell, you're not really limited. Like, people will say, oh, you can't build a native like UI, which is simply just untrue. You can. It's not going to be easy. You have to pay attention to the platform you're running on and take the right measures to make sure that your app is performant, which means that you probably have to write your own code and not just download some shitty framework. But you're a goddamn developer. That's what you do. This is a tablet app. It's kind of cool. This one was built for heritage sites, UNESCO heritage sites. Really beautiful, focus on content, simple, works on every tablet. There's a case study on PhoneGap.com about it. And this is like the kind of thing that we see people having a lot of success with PhoneGap when they're dropping down to the actual content that they're trying to ship for instead of trying to build a whole lot of Chrome. These guys, Health Tap, they're kind of like the new darlings. A ton of great feedback. I think they have 4 or 5 stars in the app stores. So they're in iOS and Android. Same code base. This last one? Health Tap? Yeah. They're one of the featured ones on PhoneGap.com/apps. Yeah. So how does it all work? This is going to be interesting. I'm going to have to live code this bit. So I'm going to just live code from here. Okay. Can you guys read that okay? Okay, so PhoneGap is based on Cordova. We do have a PhoneGap binary available right now via NPM, but I'm going to use the Cordova one. There's no distinction between the two. There's no reason you wouldn't use one over the other. In the future, we're going to be adding fallbacks to PhoneGap Build, which is a hosted service, which I'll show you later, in the PhoneGap one. But otherwise, all this knowledge is transferable. So I'm going to create an app, and I'll call it Fin. So let's check it out. So this is a PhoneGap-based application. We have a www folder, because we're an Apache project. We have a folder for plugins, which I'll talk more about in a bit. Folder for platforms, which is currently empty. And a folder called merges. So I'll explain that one in a sec too. Let's add a platform. Let's build it. And let's kick up an emulator. Now it's just as easy to add other platforms like BlackBerry and Android were you to so desire to do so. This is slow because I'm running a Mac Air. It's not Cordova's fault. Oh, it's already running. So let's just kill that. Go back here. Yay. Yeah, we built an app. So that's cool. Let's take a look at the app. So this app is dead simple. It's just a single HTML page where we've got this H1 where it says Apache Cordova. We have 2 paragraph tags. And then we also have some kind of complicated JavaScript. So we have this object literal called app. An app calls initialize back in our HTML right here. So we include Cordova.js and we include index.js. I should have done that first. So let's go back to index.js. So index.js, we called app initialize. App initialize calls this.bind. This.bind calls document, add event listener, device ready. Device ready is kind of when we know we've established a connection back to the native side of the code. Device ready calls app.report device ready. This is what happens when you're an open source. Somebody went all enterprise architect on this. You could have just done this last 3 lines of code. So once device ready finally fires and it calls report, we console log and we change the class names and you get that pulsing effect that you see right here. And this code would be identical for all the platforms. So inside of PhoneGap, we don't tell you how to write your application. And so in our platforms folder, it's just a regular Xcode project. If you want access to the native bits, you have them. We don't hide that from you. You can use that. You don't have to write your app in this way. If you use our tools, it's a little bit easier. All we're doing is copying this WW into here and then running some scripts, which are under here. And this is the same for every single platform. So we abstract away the idea of www, and then we abstract away the kind of common commands like building, emulating, logging, and running an application. So that's how it works from like a development standpoint. You're probably wondering, how does it work itself? So we create a big web browser. It's like 100% height, 100% width. And we fill a whole screen. And then we bridge that browser back to the operating system that we're running on. And we call this the bridge. If you wanted to harken back to like computer science days, you could call it a foreign function interface, where we are calling native code from JavaScript. And then we load index HTML, and the rest is up to you. We don't tell you how to write your app. We don't tell you anything about what you're supposed to do. It's just web development. So actually, before we get into how to build an app, I want to quickly show you what the bridging code looks like. So this is a bit of a gotcha for people sometimes. Each platform has its own JavaScript, and that's kind of the way it has to be for now. It's not the way it's always going to be, but for now it does. So this is the JavaScript side of PhoneGap, and it's all in one big repo right now. And if I look under common, I can sort of see where the shared code lives. And so we have all this stuff right here, which is kind of, I don't know, boilerplate, basically. The real magic happens in PhoneGap.exec. And now in common, PhoneGap.exec is just going to throw an exception, because PhoneGap.exec works differently on every platform that we're on. So if you're on Android, we establish a bridge back to the native code in a different way than we do it in iOS. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that. We're not getting clean methods into every platform. But we are able to share quite a bit of code. So these are the implementations for all of the various PhoneGap APIs, and these are all essentially cross-platform, which is kind of rad. So, whoops. Let's take a look at iOS for fun. I don't know why I'm looking over there. So iOS is a pretty good example of a platform that's easy to abstract and keep common. iOS's exec bridge, we have a few different ways. So this is one reason to not build your own PhoneGap. People do. It's pretty easy to embed a web view and establish a native connection. You can totally copy and paste our code. We test this on all of the platforms, and we test heavily. And I'm going to show you more about how we test in a bit. So we've got 4 different methods for communicating between native code and JavaScript. iframe navigation is kind of like a baseline. XHR's the other way. Now, you're like, iframe? And I'm like, yep, iframe. That's right. Where is it? This will be quicker if I search. Right here. Check this beautiful code out. So, actually, that isn't the bit that I wanted to show you. Well, at the end of the day, there's an iframe here, and we're setting the source to gap : //, and we're passing a message. Now, on the native code side, we're listening for changes on a URL. We're intercepting that URL, we're parsing it, and then we're executing the appropriate native code. And you're like, oh my God, how do I get out of here without him noticing? So that's how it works. And that's basically how it's worked since the beginning. And you're like, oh, it must be super slow. And it is. It's only like 400 operations a second. And you're like, oh, that's terrible, 400 hertz. Do you need your geolocation more than 400 times a second? Probably not. So for some uses you do, right? Like if you were to like be chucking binary blobs across this bridge, it would be less than ideal. But it turns out for 99% of use cases, this is perfectly acceptable. And it works. Yeah. So that's iOS. Other platforms have different implementations. If you jump into the Cordova JS repo, you can take a look at how they work. All you gotta do is check out the exec override. So this is why we have different code on each different platform. If you look at our Android implementation, you're reading correctly that we sometimes override the JavaScript prompt, which it does work. We also have polling and loading by URL and all kinds of nasty techniques, but they work. And we test them on all these different devices, and you don't have to. So that's how it kind of works under the hood. You guys can interrupt me if you have questions about this, or if you think I'm crazy, you can leave. It's fine. So the next question that we always get is like, well, how do I build an application using PhoneGap? The answer is we don't care. We leave that up to you. That's totally your problem. This is the web. We're not here to explain to you how to build an app. You can take whatever batshit crazy choice that you want. Sometimes people like to use things like Sencha or Enyo or whatever. Or a lot of people these days we find are choosing to build with simpler tools like Backbone and Zepto and Twitter Bootstrap. But it's up to you, and that's the point. This is supposed to be like web development. It's supposed to scale back to the web browser. We're not here to dictate some kind of full stack framework to you. We have enough problems. And to that point, we also don't require any custom IDE where you got to download an Eclipse plugin and screw up your system with any more proprietary junk than you already have. Now that said, we created this app called Fin. And it's got these different platforms in it. There is nothing stopping you from just using this bit right here and using Xcode and using all the tools. Shitting me? Oh my God, I have no idea what. Don't do this right now. So this is Xcode. It's basically Eclipse, but it looks like iTunes. Only it runs worse. Yeah, and it's the same thing, right? Like, so we copied this stuff in, and if we added other platforms, actually, let's do that for fun.
So you should have worn the boy band mic. Would help you with the live coding.
Yeah. This part's really slow because it's Android. Oh, God. Actually, I know what this is. I've got my Android SDK in a weird spot. Sorry about that. Just going to add a platform as root. No big deal. Okay, it added it. So same kind of deal. We just injected this. We just generated this Android project, and so this is a totally native Android project. If you want to go in here and be crazy and work with Eclipse, give her. You can do that. One thing that's kind of fun and interesting to note is both these have a Cordova folder. And inside that Cordova folder are the commands that the command line tooling is actually calling. And these commands, they do the things that you expect them to do, but their implementations are completely different. So when you're compiling an application for Android, the incantations you need on the command line are completely different than the incantations you need for iOS. And that's probably not a surprise, but if you're a web developer and you're just trying to ship an app, you don't want to remember all this from these different platforms. You want to be able to move between these platforms smoothly without having to remember how do I actually run a build. In the case of iOS, you have to use this weird tool called Xcode build. In the case of Android, use Ant, essentially. And so we hide that complexity from you. But we don't hide it from you, but we abstract it at least a bit away. So sort of the point here is that we don't want to paint over the platforms with a bunch of leaky abstractions because we're playing cat and mouse with these vendors anyways. And we want to give you access to those tools. But at the same time, we want to make it easy for you to develop with it and use as much or as little of our tooling as you need. PhoneGap is a lot of projects. In fact, let me show you. I go to Apache. I think we're at 21 repos now, which is some level of overhead, I suppose. But we're trading the complexity of a lot of repos for the complexity of having to do merges across these repos. Yeah. You can use any bit of this or, yeah.
Well, you said that you copy the sources across the projects. So if I go and edit something in Xcode, and is it kind of synced with the other stuff, or should I just edit it? I remember there was at least previously some issues with that?
Yeah, so we clobber Cordova.js. It gets destroyed every time. In the case if you're using, excuse me, a PhoneGap project, actually let me open it in brackets. Brackets plug. Brackets is this amazing text editor from Adobe. It's actually super nice. I like it. So this was that same, app. There's a hidden folder here, which we'll get into in a little bit. So the question is, if I change something in here, will I get in trouble? If you change this, yes. Only if you're using our command line tooling on a PhoneGap-based structure. But if you just want to use our tooling just to generate an iOS project and then forget about the rest of this junk, totally, you can do that too. I guess it's just knowing when you're going to get clobbered is the real question. And in here, you would get your Cordova.js file gets clobbered every time. So it's a super good question. We want to change that at some point. So like this file is volatile, and it should be considered like it's going to die. And then if you're using a Cordova-based structure, this WW folder gets copied into these platform folders every time. Someday in the future, it's our hope that this platforms folder goes away, but we're not ready to start hiding this or treating it as a build artifact until such time as we're confident that this stuff will be frozen. Developers need to be able to get into the native code. And we're not going to try and hide that from you because we end up with leaky abstractions, and we don't want that at all. If you need to get to the bits of how this thing works, right down to its guts, we don't want to pretend that we have a better answer because we don't. Oh, man, we're not passing JSLint at all. That's hilarious. That's better. Yeah. That was funny. I thought we checked that. I honestly did. Yeah, Cordova.js is a big file. Some other interesting files actually hiding around in here. So we've got config XML. This is based on the W3C widget spec. This is how we let Cordova know where our icons are. As you can see, there's a lot of them. This is a problem, and we're not totally sure how to solve it, but we recently added this new folder called merges. Now, merges is the name might change. We're not sure. The idea with merges is that you're going to have platform-specific static assets. So you're going to have code that only runs on iOS. And our current solution today is to just put everything in the WW folder, and we compile that into every platform. And that means that when you're running on iOS, you might have a check that says, hey, am I on iOS? Cool, run this code. If not, run this other code. What we want to do is have this merges folder where a file that's inside of Android merges will only get compiled into the WW folder that we put into the Android build. And likewise with any other type of static file, so CSS, images, JavaScript. We hope eventually that we'll start pulling static assets out of our config XML and make that a part of the merges folder too. We don't have full confidence that this is the right thing to do yet, but we know that from at least the JavaScript standpoint that this is architecturally much more sound. There's no point in having CSS for WebKit if you're building for Firefox OS. All you're doing is adding weight to your final executable and probably impeding your load times and harming your ultimate performance, which is a huge issue. So that explains merges. That explains platforms. We're going to get into plugins in a second. Cordova folder is kind of a magical folder. We're not 100% sure about this bit either. This is, by the way, this is like brand new stuff. This is PhoneGap 3 that you're looking at. It's released, it's out there, it's open source. We're not really talking about it. This is actually probably the last time I'm officially talking. So I'm just going to show you all the cool shit that's coming up. And this is one of them. So hooks would allow you to add your own instrumentation to a build as you run different commands. And we're using this internally right now as we build PhoneGap apps. We're not entirely sure about all this stuff, but it's kind of cool. And it's a hidden folder, and the names are going to change, and this is sketchy stuff, but we think it's awesome. So I guess the point here is that this is hybrid development. It kind of combines the strengths of the web with all the strengths of the native environments. The joke is that we get the weaknesses of both too, which is true. The other joke is like, write once and debug everywhere. It's true. But we don't try and hide it, and I think this is a big difference. Like you see a lot of other platforms, and you get stuck into leaky abstractions where you're playing cat and mouse with the vendors. Right, so we don't hide the tooling. I showed you the CLI tooling, or at least I showed you a bit of the CLI tooling. Something else worth noting is that you don't need to use this giant binary executable CLI. When you download PhoneGap, where's my web browser? Oh, I was in my web browser. So if I go to PhoneGap.com download, this generally should happen quite quickly. SourceForge? That makes no sense. All right, I'm not going to wait for this. When you download PhoneGap, we give you the individual platforms. Oh, that was just a lot of fail. We give you the individual platforms so that you can run what we call our create scripts. I'm going to show those to you. I'll show you Android for now. So I'm in Cordova Android. I'm not sure what one I'm in, but so our command line scripts just call the command line scripts for the platform that we happen to be on. So in this case, I'm generating just an Android project. You don't need to use our big global binary executable if you don't want to. And this means that you don't have to find yourself locked into like how we do things or the tools that we use. You can use these to like build just for one platform or for more than one if you want to. The point for us is that we just want to make this easier and prove that web dev can be a viable option. And our CLI tooling is indiscriminate to the personal platform that's running on. Has anybody here used Winery before? Oh, actually, quite a few of you guys have. That's awesome. So there's like legit mobile developers in the house. I am sorry. I'm going to show this off anyways for all you guys. You can grab a beer. So Winery's rad. When we first started doing this stuff, it's a nightmare. You don't know what's going on inside of the web view that you're running on. And this guy, Pat Mueller, created this tool called Winery. And we started calling it Wiener on the internet, which he didn't like. But now everybody calls it Wiener. It stands for Web Inspector Remote. And so I'm going to copy this script tag. Jump over to my terminal, on my desktop. That's pretty small. Okay, so I'm going to paste this. I'm going to paste this and open it up in Vim. And then I'm going to add some H1 tags because I'm a crappy developer. Whatever. So that's cool. Now over here, jump out of full screen for a second. Make you full screen. So this would work if I wasn't just in a simulator. I'm just doing this in a simulator so you can see it. Okay. Oops. There we go. Let's check this out. Oh, yeah. So this is a big deal. You couldn't do this before Winery. You had no idea what was going on. You couldn't access the device. Now, this could be a real device. It could be a simulator. And there's recent patches now for Winery for Windows Phone. So you can remote into a live device and inspect it, run JavaScript, arbitrarily change property values, do anything that that Web Inspector can do, which is a pretty big deal when you're doing mobile development and you have no idea what the hell's going on. Yeah, we love this tool. It's made the world of web development like leaps and bounds better. I think we can get even all this crazy network data. Oh, I think I have to record. Refresh.
Have you had any problems with the like actual devices?
Yeah.
I mean, like connecting, because I had a massive problem just like when I have the actual device and the network stuff. So that comes to
Working local, like on the same Wi-Fi network, is pretty much the only way this works. Yeah, you can. We have done, and with PhoneGap build, you can do Winery globally on emulate.phonegap.com. Or sorry, not emulate. That was spoiler alert. Damn. What is it again? What do we put Winery on? It's debug.phonegap.com. I totally blanked out there. This original long drink shit's pretty good. So yeah, you can use our hosted version, and this one's super sketchy, especially given that now there's probably some guy on the internet with this anonymous. Am I connected to somebody? Oh, I'm not. If this was green, I would have been connected to someone. Once in a while, oh, someone did connect. That's awesome. Somebody on the internet just got that. That's awesome. I love it when that happens. Every once in a while, you get like, look at this. I got their Google Analytics console logged. Oh, that's hilarious. People shouldn't. So don't use the anonymous. Look at this. Oh, that's so dumb. Wow. Look at that. I even know where they are now. That is funny. So anyhow, that's a fail. Web Inspector remote. Good times. Yeah, I've had connectivity issues too. It's like a hit or miss. We had one instance where we were doing, we had a designer, and she's awesome. She did like a beautiful, wicked design. Every LI element in this long scrolling list had a gorgeous gradient and drop shadow and a bevel and a glow. And it had like a 2 frames per second scroll. And we're like, we can't do this stuff, you know, like the phone hates us. And we showed her by going in with Winery and turning off that CSS, how much faster it would scroll. So it was good for that, but it's also just good for like general JavaScript debugging. But yeah, it fails, it loses connections. It's not 100% reliable. Most of these platforms now too have some form of remoting built in. Well, iOS 6 does. Anyways.
Hey, actually, now that we're talking about iOS and like talking about debugging, like any tips on like working with the like legacy version of iOS? Because you know, okay, there was this problem of how does it like hitting like 10 megabyte boundary on like loading images and all
on
the
the
stuff.
or on the GPU cache or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like, okay, we know like Winery won't help on that because we don't have kind of like profiling tools on that, but I wouldn't want to go like native on that one either.
Yeah,
Any
there's
tips
no
for that?
instruments for iOS yet, not for the embedded web view. Yeah, I wish I had better answers. Window.performance is there in iOS 6 again, not in older versions of iOS. I guess the good news is that Apple forces updates. I don't know. It's the dark ages, right? Like this is brand new stuff. iOS has only been around for 5 years. I don't know. Yeah, the tools are blunt, and they're kind of Stone Age. They're getting better. Jazz hands. I don't know. All right, so this is my website. I'm pretty good at CSS, and and this guy is called Ripple. Ripple's was created by some Canadians that ended up going on to work at RIM. Now they work for Alicia Keys at BlackBerry, and it fakes Cordova, which means that you can do your development locally and not have to run a bunch of weird simulators and SDKs and stuff. They recently donated this to the Apache Software Foundation. By recently, I mean like a week ago, the source landed at the Apache Software Foundation. We're going to be incorporating this into PhoneGap and Cordova as a first-class platform so that you don't even need to have an SDK installed and you can just do development locally. It's not there yet. It's still early days, beta, whatever. But it's kind of cool. And so they've built it out so that you can have a bunch of platforms, but you can do things like fake accelerometer events, whatever, like geolocation business. My complicated website doesn't use any of these features, of course. You can fake network events. It basically lets you like get up with development without having to deal with development.
At least that's what like all the guys I know who work on PhoneGap apps have been doing by themselves, basically just like faking the whole Cordova.
Yep.
And so they can work in a browser and do.
Everybody wants to work inside of Chrome DevTools and use Sublime. And like we can pretend they don't, but they do. And so we want to make that easier. And this is kind of one way to do it. The other angle that you can go with, my amazing website does not have media queries, so, but it's just sort of mobile friendly by its own design. But you can just go into Chrome DevTools. By the way, if you want to be cool, you put your Chrome DevTools and dock it to the right, because then it's like a phone on the left. It's not really that cool, but I like to think it's kind of cool. Overrides, and then you could change the user agent. It's actually, you know where this is cool? I don't know if I have any. I hope I don't have any creepy, weird email. Yeah, you can make it. You can make Gmail think that you're running an iPad, or whatever. Yeah, kind of neat. I mean, most people are doing this today, where they're just using Chrome DevTools. But we want to make it so that Ripple is kind of a first-class platform for emulation, because most people are doing this already. They're writing their own Cordova.js file, and they're console logging whenever they hit like one of our APIs, which usually there aren't that many that they're using. I'm pretty stoked on Ripple, though. I think it's going to be a nice addition to how we do things. So then the next thing is, how the hell do we build PhoneGap? Like, how do you do that? It used to just be painful. Well, it still is. But so we've set up, Phil Mai, one of our devs, has set up a continuous integration system. We built this giant wall. Oh shit, that's bad. It's not that bad. So we have this device wall, and we've got a whole bunch of phones attached to the wall, And every time a commit lands to PhoneGap, we compile a version, we put our tests inside of an app, we compile an app against that, and we install it on a whole bunch of phones, and then we launch it, and then we post the results back to a CouchDB instance, and we visualize it up here. We're only doing it for these two platforms right now. Not having 100% test passing is actually normal, because not every platform has every feature we're testing, so some devices don't have a front-facing camera, for example. But this gives us a degree of assurance that what we're doing isn't destroying the world without our developers having to go and run on dozens of different phones. All of this is open source. So RIM is starting to use this. They're running a version. At Adobe, we're running 2 versions of this. And you can go and check it out at ci.cordova.io at any time to see where our test pass and fail rate is on the various platforms. This is pretty new. We got this running, I don't know, maybe in the last 4 months. And we're only improving it over time. And I think a lot of dev shops could benefit from setting something up similar. We have an instance where we have a lot of shared code between these different platforms. The iOS guy might break the Android guy, and he might not know because he doesn't care. He doesn't want to build for Android, right? And that's fine. It's totally normal. So this way, we're at least alerted to that problem, and we can immediately identify where the issue is and then go and fix it. It's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than finding out after you deploy. So something we're checking out. The URL for this, it currently is not under the main project. It's under this guy named Phil Mai. So it's at GitHub philmai/medic. But they'll be in my slides if you want to check it out. And this is under pretty active development. Yeah, useful. Advanced mode. This might be a good point actually to take a beer break, because I'm going to get into some of the crazier shit and then some of the new shit. How many of you guys are web developers? So, okay, so who here is writing JavaScript on a regular basis? Okay, so most of you will find this funny then. Have you guys seen WTF.js before? Cool, so that was my fault. And for fun, just because, whatever, let's do something different. Because I'm a crappy developer. That's awesome. All right. I'm sorry I didn't go boy band. I'm yelling into the mic at least. So it's hard to see. It's just for fun, just because I like doing this stuff. So this is Node. It's this JavaScript thing, and it's a REPL. I know that part's obvious. So true is true. Not true would be false. And if I wanted to coerce back to itself, you do that. A lot of people who use grouping operators to do coercion with this trick, which means that we can test the truthiness of arbitrary things. Is an empty string truthy? It is not. But a full string or a string with characters is truthy. So that's kind of cool. And the only reason I do this is because we're going to build on top of this and do some weird shit. So there's this guy called the abstract equality operator, which lets us test if something. So an empty array is truthy, as you can see. So that would stand to reason then that this is true, which it is not. So the abstract equality operator is painful. It does implicit casting or coercion. And this implicit casting or coercion is a result of most bugs in JavaScript. What happened here was, because we encountered the abstract equality operator, it encountered a Boolean value on the right-hand side of the expression. For whatever fucking reason, it just cast that thing to a number. So I can do this. If I want to cast true to a number, I can also cheat a little bit. Can you guys see that okay? Okay, cool. So I can also cheat a little bit, and I can use the addition operator to cast to a number, which means that in JavaScript, true plus true equals 2. That happened. So that's neat. Let's talk about strings. I am a string is an instance of string, right? Nope. So what is string? It's a string to string, but it's not a string. Does string of ABC equal ABC? It does. Let's type of string ABC. It's a string, except it ain't. Oops. It ain't when I'm a new string, sorry. Then it's an object. And so when I do an abstract equality operator, like I do above, when it was like WABC, what I'm actually doing is new string dot, believe it or not, toString. Right. Good times. One more fun one, just for fun. Magically increasing numbers. So this is because JavaScript only has one type for numbers, which is a powerful feature. It's not a bad thing. This is how JavaScript works. We don't have floats, we don't have integers, we just have a number and it casts everything around or boxes them, which is useful. So that means that you get like kind of funny behaviors where you get like 1 plus 0.2 is equal to, strictly equal to 0.3, right? It isn't. Because 0.1 plus 0.2 is actually equal to 0.3 in a little bit. Just a little bit more. Numbers are like completely fucked up. So 3 is greater than 2 is greater than 1. No. And that's because 3 greater than 2 evaluates to true. And as we learned earlier, true can sometimes be a value. So we're essentially saying, which it isn't, because 1 is not greater than 1. But we can fix it if we want to, I guess. Should I keep going? Are these funny at all? They're kind of funny. Let's see if I can find some funnier ones. This is like the ultimate. Okay, is an array equal to an array? According to the abstract equality operator, an array is not equal to an array. But if we wanted to make an array equal to an array with the abstract equality operator, we can just add a not operator, and then they would be equal. Fuck, what's up with that, right? Okay, so let's see if I can explain this. So what does not an array evaluate to? Well, that evaluates to false. And if I do that, a false on the right-hand side of the expression would then get cast to a number. So essentially, I just did that, which is 0. And the left-hand side of the expression just got cast to a number. So essentially, I just said, of course. That's JavaScript, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so PhoneGap. You're all like, did I choose the right career? Something not a lot of people know about PhoneGap. Sorry, bro. So something a lot of people don't know of PhoneGap is that you can embed PhoneGap into a native application. We saw a pattern where people were developing applications and they would have a native title bar and a native tab bar and then a PhoneGap web view in the middle. Totally normal. This happens all the time. People do this. Awesome. We wanted to allow them to do that. So we created a thing called Cordova View. If you go to, well, there's better places than our docs, but you can go to our docs, and there's a little thing in here called embedding the web view. It's really only applicable to Android and iOS, but it lets you embed a PhoneGap-based web view in a native application. Why would you want to do this? Well, you might want some native Chrome. This is totally normal. The other reason you might want to do this is you could want to take an existing native application and start porting it to PhoneGap. You may want to take certain parts of your app and have it interact with the native code that you've already written, or you just might have a native app that needs web content and have access to device APIs. It's all totally normal, and we want to facilitate that use case. And we never told anyone we did this, and we didn't document it. And then when people found out, they're like, "Oh, why didn't you tell us?" And it's like, "That's a good idea." So I added a slide. So extending the browser with native plugins is like a really, really big deal. So when we built PhoneGap, we ended up accidentally creating this native plugin API without meaning to do it, and it works really well. You can augment the PhoneGap web view with any feature that's available to you in the native platform that you're running on. We don't prevent you from touching anything. And in fact, people found that out, and they started doing it themselves. And we were like, oh, no, we didn't document that. But sure, that's cool. So we created this repo called PhoneGap Plugins. This is going to go away. We're creating better ways now, but this exists now. So if you want an example of how to extend PhoneGap for a particular native platform for features that we don't do, you can go to this repo and you can check out what people have done in the wild. So for iOS, there's something like 250 plugins. So there's a whole bunch of shit that we don't do that you might want to do on a particular platform. And people have just submitted this stuff out in the wild, which is great. A good example would be in-app purchases or, I don't know, native UI stuff, Twitter integration, whatever. Building plugins is actually really easy. So again, if you go to our docs, we don't lock you out of this stuff. And so we have a plugin development guide. It's a well-documented path now, how to build a plugin for a native platform. Plugins are currently on a per-platform basis. So JavaScript is the same across platforms. You have to implement an exec function. The exec function accepts a success callback, a failure callback, a service in action, and then an array of arguments. A service would be like the namespace, essentially, and the action would be the method. And so an example, you could expose just this part or just write the native bits and just use the Cordova exec function if you wanted to. I don't recommend you do that. You probably want to implement some kind of wrapper. And so in our example, we just implement like how to do an echo between native code and the WebView code. So the WebView code is always JavaScript, and it always just calls a Cordova exec function. Cool. And then on the native side, you have to implement a plugin interface. So there's a little bit of ceremony you have to do in Android, for example. But essentially, it all boils down to an execute method, which takes the exact same parameters that you would on the JavaScript side. You do native stuff, and then you return a result. There's slightly more complicated examples that are out there. So this is where it stands today. Now, we've realized that people don't just want to write plugins. They also want to distribute plugins and discover them and find them and validate them and install them and remove them. And so we are creating this new project called Plugman. And it's under development. This is, again, like bleeding edge stuff. This will ship in PhoneGap 3. And it kind of works today. And it facilitates the installation, removal, and discovery of plugins. So we're going to kill that repo I just showed you at some point, but if you want to write plugins today, you can do that, and that's fine. You can augment your native application or your web application with native code. Do you have a question, dude, or just a cramp?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So one of them, what would be like even like nice to write with plugins that would be using the plugins. Another thing is that okay, I'm not expert on PhoneGap or like expert on using plugins, but for like a few cases where I have tried them, I've been like mighty disappointed to find out actually this like plugin doesn't work on Windows Phone 7. So as a user of a plugin system, I would like to know like which platforms it actually builds on, in which kind of like platform it currently works. Any chance of getting that to the new infrastructure?
Right. So that should be declared in the plugin XML on which platforms it's going to work. This is in flux. So the old way, as you just saw, was basically a bunch of files. Actually, let's jump over to that. So the old way was people found out our API and started hacking up plugins on their own. So this is an iOS plugin for adding a badge to your app icon. You know when you're in iOS and you get an email and it's like adds that little annoying red badge? Here's a plugin for doing that with PhoneGap. So the badge icon has a header file, and not surprisingly, it's got a method or set badge, and you pass it a number. Objective-C is super pretty. And then it's got a JavaScript implementation that we'll call badge set badge, accepting as an option the number. That's it. So right now in our current way, it's a copy-paste job, right? You have to copy and paste these files into your Objective-C project, and you got to hope like hell that everything just kind of works. And what we realized was, while that's nice, and people will do that, we have a common API for how this stuff gets done. And so if we create a common package format, then we can automate installation, removal, and versioning. And that's what we're up to now. And so automating the installation and removal will include what source files, so that your plugins will be, well, here's the thing. The plugin will only be as cross-platform as many platforms as you write it for or somebody else did. So if some guy wrote a badge plugin, it only applies to iOS. It's only going to apply to iOS. But yeah, it would be nice if someone else contributed to that guy's plugin. This is also new. This is brand new. We're working on it. This will ship, and you will be able to add and remove plugins at will. And we're dogfooding this on our own APIs. So we've just started with the accelerometer API across all of our platforms. But the idea is in Cordova or PhoneGap 3.0, we will ship with no APIs, and you'll use our tools to add and remove APIs as you want. Now, the bigger story here, that means that you, any guy in the Wild West, and also all of our partners that are working with us will be able to add and remove plugins and have discovery for plugins as they want. So we've obviously got partners with Mozilla and Google. So if you wanted to use, say, a Chrome packaged app API in your PhoneGap app, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that and then deploy to iOS and Android and BlackBerry and all these other places. And that's the point of this sort of plugins API. We're going to also get the ability to independently version our APIs, as opposed to now, today, you have to rev every time. And most people don't need all these APIs. When you're building an app, you probably need one or two of our APIs, but you don't need all 21 or whatever APIs that we are shipping with, or your app is badass, which happens. People do use a bunch of them. So native plugins are a little bit in flux, but you can build them today. And so if anyone tells you that PhoneGap apps aren't native or whatever, then they're full of shit. You can build whatever you want with PhoneGap. You can access any native functionality that you need. That's right there for you. So this isn't to say that PhoneGap's perfect. Surprise. There's huge problems. And the biggest problem with PhoneGap, I'd say, is that not all mobile browsers are the same. We leave you at the mercy of the platform that you're on. If you're on iOS, you are dealing with WebKit for iOS. And when you go to port your code to Android, you will be running on the Android WebKit, which is nothing like the iOS WebKit. And good news, every version of Android has a different WebKit. Awesome. Then when you get over to IE land, Windows Phone, it's completely different than WebKit itself. We don't hide that from you. That's your problem. That's web development, man. Yeah, so this is the weakness of PhoneGap, maybe, or perhaps its strength. Your code is intentionally supposed to be portable back to the mobile browsers that you're going to be running on. So we don't try and change that. The other huge issue is that to provision a machine, like when I first set this thing up for mobile dev, it took me like 3 or 4 days. So you got to install all these SDKs, you have to upgrade them, you have to get your phones provisioned, and it takes time. It's a huge pain in the ass. We built a tool for that. This isn't like a big plug or anything, but it's just to show you what it is. So we created a web service for PhoneGap. And it's called PhoneGap Build. Apparently I am screwing up. So it's not the prettiest, but what's going on here is that we've uploaded code to the PhoneGap Build web service in the form of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we compiled it for all of the PhoneGap platforms that PhoneGap Build supports, which right now you can see down here. And we built them. And so why would you want to do this? Well, you might want to do this for distribution. You might want to do this because you're on a netbook. You might want to do this because you're on a Mac and you want to build for Windows, or you might want to build for Windows and you're on a Mac. Wait. You get what I mean? And yeah, that's all this does. So this service is actually really, really dead simple. There's an API available to it, and it lets you build. That's why we call it PhoneGap Build.
Does it work with the plugins?
It does not work with the plugins yet. The plugins don't even work locally yet, so it's okay. They do. So the idea with the plugin installation or removal, yeah, that's so that we can do that remotely as well. SDK maintenance is tough. We originally built PhoneGap Build because we would do PhoneGap training sessions, and we'd be like, all right, everybody, did you install all the SDKs? And everyone would be like, nope. And we'd be like, oh, sweet, we have a 5-hour class where we're going to install SDKs together and not build anything. So we built PhoneGap Build to solve that. It's free for open source and free for a private app, so try it out. This is the part where I get into the stuff I'm not supposed to tell you about, but I'm going to tell you about anyways. And I'm making no promises about dates or times. So this is just things that we're working on that's kind of neat. And by all means, ask me questions and interrupt me. So first big one, I showed you the command line tooling that we've been working on. That's on the Cordova side. There's going to be a PhoneGap binary. And the idea with the PhoneGap binary is that if you don't have a local SDK installed or you don't have the platform capability, that it'll just work with PhoneGap Build out of the box. And we're not going to opt you in automatically. It's up to you to opt into it. You don't even have to use this if you don't want to, but we think it'll be convenient for people. So if you're on a netbook, you'll be able to build for all these platforms simultaneously without actually using any CPU cycles on your own device for building it. So that's coming. Cool. Android's fucked, and we want to fix it. So Android 2.3 in particular has like a 50% market share, and Android 2.3 is a nightmare to develop for. We have Chromium building right now for Android 4. Opera recently got Chromium building on Android 2.3 and they're shipping, and we're gonna Vulkan mind meld with those guys and figure out a way to get this happening inside the PhoneGap project. This will be an opt-in. So we're not going to make people use Chromium for their Android builds because right now, if you build your own browser and ship it, you're going to have about a 17 to 20 meg executable, which means that your app will be pretty big for Hello World. However, it also means that you will have a consistent browser for all versions of Android, which is win. Big win. So we're hoping to get that through sometime in the next few months. The final big one, and this one's huge. So everybody, we have traditionally always said, we will never tell you how to build an app for any particular platform. We'll never dictate any of your web code choices. And as a result of that, everybody grabs jQuery mobile and fucks up. And that's fine. They can do that, and we want them to continue to have the freedom to do that. But at the same time, we kind of have some good ideas about how to build a great application. And so we've stolen, begged, borrowed, and started working with the best people at Adobe. And we have a huge team of WebKit developers at Adobe that work strictly on CSS and enhancing it inside of WebKit. And we're working with them to create a UI library specifically designed for PhoneGap. This hasn't been announced yet, by the way. Nobody knows about this. You guys are like the first room I've talked to about this. So where did this start? Turns out this didn't even start with us. So the library is called Topcoat. This is open source now. You guys can check this out. And it started, whoops, not there, not there. It started with brackets and reflow. I see people tweeting, that's awesome. So brackets is a text editor that our team, not our team, but the web platform group at Adobe is building. And brackets started to get built, and that's cool. There was some UI controls that were needed for this, not a lot. And then reflow, same story. And so brackets and reflow realized that, hey, we're duplicating efforts. And so internally at Adobe in our XD group, which means experience design, they started to create a design language. And so this isn't like Bootstrap or Zerb. This is totally different. Bootstrap and Zerb are designed for building responsive web app, like web sites. This is for building apps, very specifically desktop applications, using web technology. And it's a design language. It's not the same thing. And so it's things like buttons and, I don't know, drop downs and switches and whatever, you know, like stuff like you need for building a UI. And this is early, by the way. This is like barely even shipped. And don't judge the code because this is not considered production at any rate. So we built this stuff internally, only for us, not for anybody else. This is for our purposes. This isn't for you. But the idea is, well, fuck it. They need it too. Like, people need to build great apps and great looking apps. And we're rethinking how we're building all this stuff, and we're going to throw most of this crap away. But Topcoat Mobile will be the part that is informed by PhoneGap. It's basically the same as Topcoat, except for it's bigger. One of the things about this is that it's just CSS. So there's no JavaScript library. The idea would be that these controls and components will work with whatever frameworks that you choose to use. We're just going to supply you with CSS. The other big issue that we found, so we tried to use other tools. Why didn't you use Bootstrap or Zerb or whatever? We didn't use them because you can't upgrade from them. You can't compose your libraries out of like the bits and pieces that you need. If you use Topcoat, or if you use, say, Bootstrap right now, and Bootstrap updates, you're screwed. Things change, which is fine. They didn't build with this idea of a dependency chain. Also, if I only want to use a subset of Bootstrap, I can't unless I delete a bunch of stuff. And then when they update, I'm screwed. So with Topcoat, we're building things as like totally discrete UI components that you get to pick and choose which parts you use and compose your own build out of it. And it's just CSS again, and we're building with stylus. We're hoping to ship this officially sometime late spring, like around May. So this is a heads up. I'm not telling you to use this. In fact, don't use this, but I'm just letting you guys know that this is out there and it's coming. And we're hoping it'll become sensible defaults for creating really good-looking applications that are fast by default. So the first mantra for Topcoat the whole way through has been performance first. And so what's up with that? A lot of these other things that have been built, they've been looks first. And how something looks doesn't mean that it feels good. And if it doesn't feel good, then it's just no good. If it looks great as far as screenshots, it still doesn't mean that it's a good performing thing. And it turns out if something performs good, then it kind of looks good, or at least it feels good. And that's what we're after for like our user experiences for building applications that matter. We have set up benchmarking servers using the same infrastructure that we use for PhoneGap, and we're in the process of benchmarking right down to GPU level the impacts of this CSS, so that we know if we change something inside of Topcoat, if we've made Topcoat faster or slower, which means that if you're using Topcoat, that it's only going to get better and better over time. And we're testing it against all of the platforms that PhoneGap's using. So sometime in May, we're not going to tell people they have to use this. We're just hoping that we're going to build it in such a way that you're going to want to use it.
How about then the customization? Like if you're measuring your CSS, if someone needs, or people need to have like their own look and feel there, how is that gonna?
So yeah, that's a great question. Let's go take a look at Topcoat's repo.
Because I think at least one big problem that a lot of people have said about Twitter Bootstrap is that, yeah, it's great, but now everything looks like Twitter Bootstrap.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, everything does look like Twitter Bootstrap. So Topcoat components are split into two pieces. They're split into layout and reset, and then they're split into a skin. And the skin is opt-in, so the look of the component is completely discrete from the layout and reset of the component. And so the layout and reset of a component I think, like here we've only got button, but whatever. And yes, this is complicated. That's a lot of code for a button. Life's tough. So this is the button. And you'll notice that it is only layout and reset. So you don't have to use any of this skin if you don't want to. Oh, come on, Chrome. Fuck, sorry. Yeah, we thought of that basically, though, to your question. So, and yeah, we're using stylus too. Again, super early. Ignore like how much stuff is here. Recognize that, oh yeah, this is also kind of cool. The documentation for everything is embedded inside of the actual stylus thing, and we generate a style guide based on the components you choose. So our dream for this architecture is to use the merges folder inside of PhoneGap, combine it with Topcoat so that you'll be able to generate a project that will also give you a style guide for only the components you use, for only the platforms you need, with only the styles that you have to, and only compile it at the time for the platform that it needs. So you won't get a bunch of CSS for a different platform that doesn't need it. And you'll get a style guide out of the deal, just because that's awesome. This part, the theming part, totally discrete from layout and reset. Also, just because that's how it should be. So none of this big ball of CSS where I have to glue it together with a bunch of weird grunt files, and every time somebody updates, I'm screwed. Independently versioned as well. Yeah. Again, not ready for production. Totally big sneak. Don't tell anyone. Even though you all probably tweeted it already. So like that's a big thing, but like my job ultimately is to get people to help us. It's all this is open source, both PhoneGap, Topcoat, and Cordova, and we need help. We don't have all the answers. The place to come to help us is Apache Cordova or Cordova.io. If you jump over to the Cordova.io domain, you can find out more about how to contribute if that's something that interests you. It's pretty easy. If you have an idea or anything and you want to get involved, jump on our mailing list. There's one of them right here. And start talking to us, and we'll give you ideas on where you can contribute. Simple stuff like docs is a great place to start. And you can get a shiny Apache email address out of the deal and say you're a PhoneGap contributor. And that's it.